look at a couple of things to show you regarding the assignment and obviously how to go about doing the assignment with a case study. Look at a couple of things to show you. That was the YouTube echo. Let me just close that. Okay, so how many of you have read the assignment brief?
I have.
All right, okay, that's great. So as long as you've just, the idea here is just to check with everyone that, they have actually, read the assignment brief, although it may be, we will discuss this, but it is just to make sure that you at least have had a sight of the assignment brief, which is great. Now, let's look at, a couple of things on this particular session. What I want to do is basically discuss how we would address, when you have a case study, in particular in the assignment brief. I know some of you have attempted a case study earlier, which was for another unit, but the idea here is to take you also through how do we look at assignments which are given to us at the end of the unit. But these assignments are essentially going to be attempted by reading a case study. So what I have got is a document here, which is in front of me. And what you can see on the screen is that this is the assignment front page, or the first page of the assignment brief, which basically requires you to fill in things like your name. Some of you need to, start getting into this. UK Versity, tutor name. So I'm going to put my name, subject, leave it blank, because the subject is basically, a case study on Andrew, which is a person who has autism. And we will go through this in a bit more detail. Now, in terms of student signature, you can actually put in your name, first name, and this can be done and change the font, from a different form. It looks like a signature font. If we change it by dropping, and going down to choosing a different form, which is a bit more calligraphic, and that would basically be your signature. Now, word count has to be 3,500 or more, because this is a case study. And then obviously, once I complete this side of things, we will look at grading this unit as well, because the unit is, as you can see, graded. So this unit, I think, carries 6 credits in terms of marks. So obviously, most of you should be looking at achieving, a grade, merit, or distinction. Now, part B of the assignment, after the front cover sheet has been filled, part B of the assignment, here also the set date on the assignment would be the date on which we actually started the unit. So when we looked at the start of the unit of this particular unit, if I just go back quickly on the calendar, this unit is where we started. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we started this unit on 15th April 2023. Due date is going to be 15th May 2023. And what date you submit will be the actual date which will come in. So if you're submitting this unit on, say, 10th of May, put 10th of May. If you're submitting on 12th, put 12th of May. And new resubmissions. So in this case, it would be not applicable because you've not been asked to resubmit. So just make sure that you put NA or not applicable in the cover sheet. Now this cover sheet is fully complete. The tutor will fill it up, will confirm whether the grade is accurate, and then the internal verifier, Philip, would essentially, confirm the grade assessment by the tutor. Now, part B of the assignment brief basically talks about, a case study. Now, what is a case study? This is something that we need to look at, understanding that why is a case study given, what is a case study, and why is it specifically in say, for example, when we study subjects like social care, or studies subject like healthcare studies or social sciences, essentially, you would generally find assignments which have case studies. Now, case studies are basically given from a point of view of allowing the learners to research in depth, and then this research that you do bases the scenario or the case study given on a specific person or a situation, or in this case, then allows you to develop your understanding of how you're going to put across things in the evidence or in the assignment. So it will provide you an opportunity to do detailed analysis of a particular problem which has been given in the case study. And this problem, you're going to analyze or basically go into the detailing of it in terms of why this problem occurred, how this problem can be resolved, what are the steps that can be taken to minimize the problem or do away with the problem. And what you're going to do is to answer these questions: what, why, when, where, how. So when we look at answering these questions like what, why, when, where, how, these questions essentially are based on allowing you to do independent research around the situation given in the case study. And what you do is, when I say independent research, what you're going to be doing is collecting data and information which is related to the topic given, and this will be something that you would have studied in the unit. So what you will also do is, when you take data into account and then use it for the purposes of writing the evidence for the case study, thereby doing the tasks, what you're going to do is look at various sources. These sources would be sources that could come across. When I say generally speaking, these sources tend to be sources of interview, observation, or documents. Now, we are not going to do any interviews and observations here. Using the case study and our creativity, that we have covered this content within, or when I say the indicative content that we have covered within the unit in terms of its study, is going to be used to compile this evidence and then present an essay which will essentially look at covering all the tasks given in the case study. Now, case studies are also, when you approach the solving of case studies, or when you look at essentially an assignment which has case studies, you are going to be looking at reading the case in detail. So first and foremost thing that we have to do is we have to underline, and whichever way works for you. In my case, I underline, or obviously circle some of the key terms and key bits of information which are being given to me, and they stand out in the case study. So that is the first thing that we do. First is read the case study carefully. Read it maybe 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, even 10 times, to understand what the case study is asking about. And you make notes while you read the case study. That's the first thing that you do. The main advantage of reading the case study a number of times is to identify what is the problem or the issue being talked about in the case study. That is what you need to identify by studying the case study maybe a number of times. Then, after you have identified the problem or the issue, what we need to be able to do is conduct research. That means you will go back into the presentations and the handouts and discussions that we have done, and find meaningful data or information which will relate to this particular case study. And when I say relate to this particular case study, what I mean by that is, we will go into details, but what I mean by that is that you are going to pick out the key things like safeguarding principles. What are the three kinds of abuse which can be faced? And then you're going to try and relate this to the case study or the problem that is being given in the case study. After this has been done, what you're going to do is basically look at developing a solution. And the solution is the main part of your write-up task that you're going to do, because this solution is going to be providing answers to what the case study as a problem or is posing, or what are the issues which are being discussed or highlighted in the case study. And your idea of thinking creativity by looking at reading the going through the material that we have covered in the unit would then allow you to develop a solution. And this solution, with some recommendations to how to solve the problem or the issue, is going to be the main write-up of your assignment. Okay. Now, when you finally look at compiling the report, your report will include things like, in order to provide an understanding of what you have understood by reading the case study, you will actually structure your report out in 5 or 6 broad, let's say, paragraphs or areas. The first part of your case study assignment would be introduction. You are going to introduce what you have read, what you have understood from the case study, and that is going to be kind of reproduced or rewritten in your own words to understand what the problem is, what is the issue, why it occurs, what are the basic bits of information provided in the case study are going to be recollected, recaptured, and then reproduced in the introduction of the assignment. After you've written the introduction, you would go into a bit of background. In the background, you're going to be looking at the how, why, where part that you have got from the case study in the scenario which has been given. That is going to be introduced and elaborated as the background. That why is this problem happening? Why is this issue happening? And you're going to look at the factors which are essentially looking at creating this as an issue. Once you've written the background, then you go into the core issue. What is the issue which is to be addressed in writing the evidence? That is something called the problem statement. So one of your headings in your assignment is going to be problem statement. So problem statement could be 10 words, 15 words, 20 words, depending on what are the issues being faced, and those are going to be summarized as the problem statement. And then you're going to look into doing a bit of analysis. That means you are going to talk in detail about the problem. What are the advantages, disadvantages, pros and cons? What are the benefits, disbenefits, whichever way it works. You are going to do some analysis by presenting the evidence, and that evidence will come from theory or the key areas of the unit that you have studied. And towards the end of that analysis, you're going to propose a solution. And then finally, in the end, you'll make a recommendation of how this problem can be, or how this issue or problem which has been discussed in the case study can be solved, can be averted, can be resolved, and then make a conclusion of the assignment. So in the end, you would make a small conclusion, or you'll write a conclusion of 30 to 50 words, which will be following the specifics of the case study, and then what have you finally concluded by, in terms of presenting the evidence in terms of an assignment, what have you finally concluded in that, and that will be essentially a part of the conclusion. So main part of why assignments are designed as case studies are that they are designed in a way that it allows you to research in detail or in depth about a specific problem or an issue, and using case studies, the assignments then allow you to structure your work or evidence by conducting independent research into 5 broad areas. So starting with introduction, background, your problem statement, analysis, recommendation, solutions, and recommendation. And then towards the end, conclusion. That is the whole idea of having an assignment. So it allows you to do or think out of the box, think creatively, because there are a number of assumptions you can make because the scenario gives you limited information. But with that information, you are able to make assumptions and then expand the topic in order to do your assignment. And the research part of it tends to be you're dipping back into the theory or the base of what you have studied in the unit. So in this unit, it is talking about principles of safeguarding. It is talking about different types of abuse. It's talking about law, legislation, which is ensuring how safeguarding is, effectively implemented in places of work or essentially in care organizations. And last but not the least, how do we go about ensuring individual's role? So safeguarding involves everybody. It involves members of public, family, friends, extended family, authorities, national, regional, national governments. So what we are looking at is what is the specific role of different types of people, their roles and responsibilities in ensuring that abuse does not happen, or neglect or abuse by neglect, exploitation, and harm is minimized. And we look at these roles in the study of this particular unit in the last learning outcome. So if I look at the case study now in a bit more detail, if I go into subsequent pages of the assignment brief, you would see that this case study would allow us to cover these particular topics, which are learning outcomes that we have covered. And to give you some idea, a grading profile will be done, and that is where I have looked at giving you some idea that, okay, when you write your assignment, it should be structured in these particular, let's say headings, these 5 headings. So, for example, understanding the subject is going to be related to introduction and background. Application of knowledge is going to be related to the problem statement and the analysis that you would do of the problem which is being faced. Communication and presentation would be essentially related to solution recommendations that you would essentially put forward to solve, the issue of, say, for example, in this case, we'll go into the details, but the disability, living allowance, which Andrew draws, and there are some issues around it. So those are the bits that you are looking at communicating in terms of, the communication and presentation. And the quality of your work essentially is going to be looking at what is the conclusion that you've drawn from the case study, how you've gone about presenting the case study, referencing part of it, and then how much effort you put in to do research. That means what kind of theoretical background frameworks, principles or things that we've studied in this unit have been actually put to use within the assignment. And that would be looking at the quality of your work, depth in terms of your quality of work, and the work that you've been able to relate to by studying the learning outcomes 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you're relating parts of those learning outcomes that you've studied in the unit to your case study. That would give the quality side of things in terms of how we grade your work. Now, there are some generic grade descriptors given. These grade descriptors are primarily for merit and distinction because you have to pass the unit. So for higher order grades like merit and distinction, it clearly says you demonstrate a very good grasp of relevant knowledge base. That means you have very good knowledge of safeguarding principles, why safeguarding is required, how is it implemented, what is the role of local, regional, and national authorities in terms of acts and legislation. So that bit would come through, and we will be looking at, taking some of these boxes here to say that, yes, the learner has used use the unit and its, let's say, the theoretical frameworks or the knowledge from the unit and essentially has applied it to the assignment. Now, for distinction, obviously, there's a slight bit of differentiation, and it says excellent grasp. That means the work that you're evidencing, the work that you are basically producing is based on examples or, referencing of similar situations which would relate to the case study. So that is where your research would go in. Now, this case study is not something very, unique. You would be able to do a bit of research by looking into reading some articles and, the reading material that are provided. And that material would allow you to understand what this situation relates to. And then using this relation between the two similar situations, when you bring it into your work, which shows that the research that you have done and how you understood the let's say the task being asked for, and then presented evidence to meet that particular criteria. Now, in the last of the pages, we are going to look at application of knowledge. So, for example, what are the assumptions you've made? What are the innovative ideas that you have looked at in terms of elaborating the case or the case study in this case? So, for example, when we look at defining the problem or issue, you're going to be looking at ideas, facts, theories, and perspective. You'll look at some concepts, you'll make some assumptions, and these are going to be how creatively you think of him, and then related to the case study given would essentially allow us to show that you have understood the unit, and then you're using the contents of the unit to apply it to the case study while doing the assignment. And then there are obviously some points. There is no way that Ascentis tells us that what point or what percentage, let's put it this way, of your grade would be related to communication and presentation and of the work, but some indication is given in the front sheet. So when we look at grade descriptors, you look at areas like 1, 2, 5, and 7 will apply. So if I scroll down and I go into areas, for example, this is area number 1. This would apply into your grading. When we look at 2, it will apply. When we look at 5, it will apply. And when we look at 7, these will apply. So At some part of it, when we look at grading of your assignment to say you achieve merit or distinction, they would be taking into account things like word limit, your writing style, your punctuation, your referencing, your spelling, and these bits would allow your units to be graded. So as it has been very clearly specified, so I didn't look at this earlier, but basically there are 7 matrices which Ascentis has in its assignment, and they have only put the ones which are relevant to the grading of this unit. So they didn't put like 3 and 4 and 6, which are not relevant to this unit. So essentially, whatever have been provided are not just provided for for the purposes of filling pages. So I don't know how many of you go about and read these parts of it, which are grade descriptors, and they are basically given for 6 units or 5 or 6 units in your course. And previous units that you've looked at grading is infectious diseases, animal physiology. We've looked at the health and social care provision. You've looked at effective communication techniques in health and social care. These units are graded, and there are grade descriptors given on the assignment brief which apply. So when I, as an assessor, look at your work and I look at marking your work, I am looking at taking into account these areas which I will match with what is being presented in the student work. So I just can't pluck out things from the air to say, okay, I need to look at this, or I need to look at that, or she's my favorite student, or he's my good student, and I would essentially give him a higher grade. No, that will not happen. This will be basically done on the basis of grade descriptors which have been provided by Ascentis. And what I do as an assessor is primarily look at interfacing these grade descriptors with the aspect of what work has been provided, and this bit tends to be how the grading on your assignment typically works.
I believe you just read.
Sorry. Right. Now, let's look at this in a bit more detail in terms of what is the case study essentially suggesting. So I will switch you over to a presentation. And that presentation, what I've done is some parts of it that I've spoken, I have created those slides so that you're able to actually go through this and maybe read it before even attempting the assignment. So there are some basic bits. Obviously, you know that this is the assignment that we're going to discuss for principles of safeguarding health and social care. Now here, the assignment title is that using a case study, it says evaluate the extent to which Andrew is at risk and in what way practitioners and agencies should be involved in safeguarding Andrew. So this is the crux of your assignment. What is the crux of the case study, and what is it summarizing in one sentence essentially, or 2 lines, is that the case study is about Andrew, which is a person who is at risk of either being harmed through abuse, neglect, or exploitation. And here, what the case study is going to be talking about is giving us some information and inputs into why is Andrew at risk first, who are the practitioners and agencies involved, what is their role, and what they should be actually doing in safeguarding Andrew so that he is not put in the harm's way. That means, what is harm's way? That he is not subjected to abuse by neglect, abuse by harm, and abuse by exploitation. That is the core essence of the case study or the assignment that we have to look at. Now, some of the important points which I would suggest in this case is take a look and read carefully the case study before starting the assignment. Now, the assignment in this case is an assignment report. So essentially what you're looking at is, basically writing. Before you even get into writing the report, my suggestion is, as I mentioned to you, that you need to be able to read the case study. Now, if you can't understand first time, read it twice, read it 3 times, 4 times, if requires, read it 10 times. But what you should be able to find out from that case study is what, when, why, where, and what is the issue, what is the problem which is being asked for to be discussed in the assignment. Now, when you write an introduction and when you start compiling the evidence for your case study, my suggestion would be write an introduction, and that introduction has to be like 50 to 70 words or even 100 words, which is like almost 3/4 of a page, because this will set the tone in terms of what you've understood from the case study, what are the assumptions you're going to be making, and what you are going to be covering in terms of the assignment writing report. Theoretical part, the frameworks, the principles, the role of practitioners. It will give a bit of a bird's eye overview in terms of what you're going to be covering and what I can expect as an assessor to read in your report. Just make sure that you're giving proper headings and subheadings. Now, this is to make obviously the assignment more presentable and easily accessible. So it is important for you to basically make sure, and that is where I'm going to recommend that you make at least 5 or 6 headings and subheadings in your assignment report, and that would be doing justification to the case study that you're going to analyze, and obviously then prepare a report on the basis of that. Make sure that you're using the assignment brief. So I have instructed this a number of times to you, and I think basic IT knowledge is a must. You need to be able to use the assignment brief, go to the 7th page or the last page of the assignment brief, insert a page, and then start writing your assignment from there, so that everything that you submit, when you submit your assignment, everything is in that particular document. The front cover sheet, your declaration, your evidence, and also the assessment and the grading criteria, and what you have actually provided as evidence is all there in the report. Referencing is to be done Harvard style. You guys, some of you have to improve your referencing a lot. It can't be just websites. You can't just put some names in like Wikipedia and things like that. It has to be proper referencing, whether you do it from the website or you do it from an article or journal or a book, but it has to be a proper referencing that follows the Harvard referencing style method. Now, you are required to write a report which is going to be 3,500 words. So make sure that the word limit is there too. It's a graded assignment. I would suggest that if you're writing 3,500 words, you're basically looking at writing 3,850, 10% higher, or 3,250 if you look at 10% lower. The documents that I've been receiving, we will obviously put them through scanning of plagiarism. That plagiarism should not be over 20%. And obviously, please understand that this unit, remember, this unit is graded, right? So I will make this in caps, graded, which means you can differentiate your work from others. That means the more you research, the more theoretical frameworks you cover, the more creatively you think of how you're going to be attempting this assignment will help you get a higher grade in this particular assignment. Now, this part, which is I've explained, I don't want to go into detail. This is the first part of your cover sheet, student declaration. Please make sure that you fill that declaration in full, and that would allow you and us to basically look at, going through the assignment and the assessment part of it pretty effectively and pretty quickly. Now, I've explained what is a case study, why you need to look at why sometimes assignments are given as case studies, and what kind of an approach you need to take to be able to address assignments which are designed or are basically providing you a case study, for analysis and obviously for writing the report. So some bits of it I have covered already. I don't want to go through this again. This is what I was explaining at the start of the session. Now, when we look at this case study, which has been given in the assignment, what I've done is I've actually just cut and pasted, the case study from the assignment brief. And as you can see, this case study, let's give it a quick read right now, which talks about Andrew, who's a 22-year-old man with autism. How many of you know the meaning of the word autism? What is autism? Any idea what is autism?
It's not mentally stable.
So autism is basically a specialist disorder, which is also sometimes referred to as ASD, autism spectrum disorder. And it's a developmental disability caused by differences in the brain. So this is a disorder which you can be born with at the time of your birth. And some people, when they are looking at autism tends to be also sometimes referred to as what is called the, genetic. It's a genetic disorder or a genetic condition. So when we talk about autism, it is a case wherein, people have differential development of their brain, and sometimes people find it hard to think, to feel, and sometimes they get very anxious in social situations, and this makes it hard for them to make friends or discuss things with other people. And because of the fact that they are always nervous or always thinking or feeling this is right, that is right, this basically makes a difference in terms of how people interact. And some of them tend to be quite shy, or in some cases tend to be let's say introverts. So when we in general talk about autism, we are looking at a disorder which is a neurodevelopmental disorder. That means a disorder related to your brain, and this affects the person's ability to be able to communicate, socialize, and interact with others. Now, this particular condition can increase in severity as you grow in age. So you might not even detect that you have this in the early years of your development, but as you grow and as you mature as an individual, some of your sensory abilities, or for example, in certain cases, the ability to be able to differentiate how to deal with people or how to have social interactions and how to behave in a particular situation tends to diminish. And this then this becomes noticeable at a higher age, or maybe at a, when patients become a bit older. So in some cases, they require help. And when I say help, they would require, help from care workers, healthcare visitors, and obviously social care workers, because these individuals, as their condition deteriorates with age, they would need help and support to be able to communicate and effectively socialize with other people in order to improve their quality of life. So this is an order which is generally seen as a genetic disorder, and this creates a disability in people in terms wherein they are not able to communicate, socialize, or interact with others, just like just like normal people. So Andrew is diagnosed with autism. He's a 22-year-old man. So what are the key things which are coming out of this case study? We are talking about a patient or a person who's 22-year-old man. He's a male. He has a condition or a disability, which is autism, who is growing up in the care of children's services. So the person is already being looked after and providing support in terms of the day-to-day functions by care children's services. And he is living in residential care. This is a key point. What is it? He is living in residential care. That means the person is not living alone, and the person is in essentially residential care. Now, he receives disability living allowance. That means he gets support from the local authority in terms of money or in terms of allowance, and that allowance is called the disability living allowance. Now, these are all key terms that we would need to do a bit of research on. What is residential care? So anybody in terms of what is residential care? Any idea what is residential care? So when we talk about long-term illnesses or long-term conditions which basically deteriorate with age, in those cases, what we generally see is that people, with these kind of disabilities which deteriorate with age or become more severe as you grow, essentially would be given what is called residential care. So this is a long-term care service that provides accommodation, provides personal care and support to individuals so that they can live independently or live as independently as possible in their own homes. So in this case, he is being provided what is called residential care. Okay, let me just mute everybody because there's a bit of background noise. Now, you can unmute yourself when you're asking questions or participating, not a problem. And I would encourage participation because this is a discussion-based, session. Now, the idea here is when I said research, you have to look at each of these individual words which are standing out that I'm actually highlighting. So one we look at the first thing that I looked at giving you information on is autism. Now we know autism, one of you tried to, obviously mention what it is, but what we need to be able to do is, this is an assignment that we are doing, which is graded unit. We need to be absolutely particular. So what I would do is research what is autism, what is residential care, what is disability living allowance. These are key things that we will need to, use and mention in our assignment. Now, his relationship with his family is difficult, and a couple of years ago, he stopped all contacts with them. So one of the things that autism as a condition exacerbates is that people find it difficult to socialize and interact with other people in social situations. So his relationships with his family have become difficult. This is another important point. Now, he clearly has some learning difficulties. So another important point. What are learning difficulties? Anybody, what are learning difficulties? We have heard about learning difficulties a couple of times as a term. What are learning disabilities? Again, there's a bit of research. If you are not able to come up with something straight away, learning disabilities refer to a wide range, of conditions which would basically limit a person's ability. So when we look at SENDs, for example, special educational needs, I'm aware of it. So that's why I can quickly mention this, that learning disabilities tend to be, disabilities or difficulties. Learning difficulties tend to be disabilities, essentially, which a person experiences in terms of his or her ability to learn, process, or retain information. So when I look at people with, say, for example, conditions like autism or, conditions like ADHD, I'm pretty sure some of you would have heard this particular term, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. Or if you look at autism spectrum disorder, which is ASD, these are common types or dyslexia is something which is very frequent that we hear about. These are areas which, if people are diagnosed having what are called these kind of disorders, then they are related to what are called disorders related to learning difficulties. That means they have disabilities which could range, in conditions from their ability and affect their ability essentially to learn, process, and retain information. So common types of learning difficulties tend to be things like dyslexia. We have ADHD, AH or ADHD, a bit of a tongue twister. So which is basically an attention deficit syndrome. And they typically impact persons' academic, social, and emotional development. So this is an important word again, and you will need to research what is learning difficulties, and that is where you would need to, put some material. That means some meat on the bones when you write your evidence as the assignment. Although this hasn't been officially diagnosed, he clearly has some, but although this has not been diagnosed, there are some issues with his personal hygiene. So there are issues with personal hygiene. What are issues with personal hygiene? Anybody? What are issues with personal hygiene? So if we talk about issues with personal hygiene, what does personal hygiene mean? Personal hygiene is nothing but your ability to be able to maintain cleanliness, shower, bathe, your dental hygiene, your hair combing or washing. These are basically things related to your personal hygiene. So there are clearly some issues with his personal hygiene that is reflected in the case study. Now here, what if I am in your shoes, this word personal hygiene would also give me 50 to 100 words to be adding to as evidence in my case study. So here, what I would, if I was in your shoes and I look at reading the case study, and that's why I'm putting in a lot of focus in terms of reading, underlining, or in this case, bolding the words that I see are important, are going to give me areas to which I can relate to in terms of theory and create evidence, are these words which I'm highlighting in bold. So personal hygiene here would mean that Andrew's personal hygiene, he has some issues. That means it suggests that he has difficulty in maintaining a consistent level of cleanliness and grooming. And what does this mean? This would mean that he probably does not bathe or bathe irregularly. He does not bathe or shower irregularly. Let's put it this way. He has maybe poor dental hygiene. And this is where I'm using my creativity, because personal hygiene is a term which has been given and I can run wild with it. I can use my creativity to look at what does personal hygiene mean. And because I need to write 3,500 words, I'm going to elaborate. So personal hygiene could be shower, could be, cleanliness, could be dental hygiene. It could be, washing of hair. It could be wearing the same clothes. It could be, say, for example, looking at physical isolation, which means that the person remains isolated or locked away in the room and does not then look at usual functions that you have to do as a human being. And it affects a person's physical health, self-esteem. And obviously, if you're not clean, if you don't smell good, or if you're not coming across as presentable, people will shy away in terms of interacting with you. And this over a period of time can lead to mental health conditions. And it could also lead to poor hygiene, which can further impact the health of that individual. So personal hygiene to me has given me at least 100 words that I can use and elaborate when I write my evidence. Now, the second part of the case study, I've broken the case study down into 4 paragraphs for easy understanding. He has a history of limited engagement with both location services and employment, which also shows that the person is isolated and is not currently in employment. He has abandoned 2 tenancies because he has not coped with living alone and is now living in short stay hostel. So this relates to residential care. Why has he been put into residential care? Because he would have not been able to pay the rents because he was not working. And obviously, because he's not been able to pay the rents, his previous tenancies would have come to an abrupt, they would have, been, say, for example, closed. And because he's not coped well with living alone, over a point in time, with the help with the social workers assessing the situation, they would have recommended residential care. Andrew has a history of challenging services and people and is known to the police for a range of incidents which he was either the victim, he has his mobile phone stolen, and was physically and verbally threatened. So this gives me a clear indication of why the authorities and the role of practitioners. If you see what is the task of the assignment, the task of the assignment is talking about the way practitioners and agencies should be involved in safeguarding. So this is a very important part in the case study, which talks about that he has his mobile phone stolen, was physically and verbally threatened. So here is where we need to relate to what kind of abuse has he been, suspected or basically put to. This abuse is physical abuse, which is what the word physically is giving a clear indication. It's physical abuse. Verbally threatened is basically bullying. It could be emotional abuse, and it could be psychological abuse, or the perpetrator throwing stones and stealing money. So in this case, again, if I go into it, there are 10 types of abuse that we have studied, which start from bullying, emotional abuse, financial abuse, institutional abuse, neglect by others, physical abuse, psychological abuse, self-neglect, and sexual abuse. So as you can see in this case study, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we are clearly seeing at least 5 or 6 types of abuses that he has had incidents of, and the police. So here, the other important word is police. Why is it police? Why is police important? Why is police important? Police is important because if I go back to the assignment title, it talks about the practitioners and agencies which should be involved. So one of the agencies which would have got involved and is aware of that he's been in problems in the past is the police, there is a representation from the police, the local authorities into these safeguarding assessment boards, SABs. So again, here, this paragraph relates to abuse that the person, in this case, Andrew as a subject is being, has a history of. So there is a lot that you can cover in this particular part of the case study, because this is directly covering what is called learning outcome 1. So here we are going to be talking about signs, symptoms of abuse. What are the symptoms which what are the signs which should have been picked up by practitioners and the agencies to minimize this particular abuse. This part, if you see, talks to me about the risks which Andrew has faced and what the practitioners and agencies should be looking into when they look at the context of safeguarding. So if you ask me, this particular bit is actually talking to me about learning outcome 2. So what I have done is, by reading the case study, I am actually drawing my own inferences that where and which part of this case study relates to which particular aspect of the assignment brief, or the bits that we have covered in terms of the discussion when we have covered the unit. Now, the last paragraph talks about he has attended accident and emergency on a number of occasions following assault. So what is assault? What type of abuse is assault?
Physical abuse.
Very good. It's physical abuse. So again, this relates to abuse here, but just we will look at, I think, because this part is covering the abuse part of it already, I don't think the awarding body would look at, relating it to it. So let's read the full paragraph. Andrew has now said that he's receiving threatening text and messages on Facebook, and he is going to be seriously assaulted. So what does this relate to? I had specifically shown a particular video on safeguarding, which took into account social media. So this was contextual safeguarding, which is the changes to safeguarding which are needing to be done in order to avoid people being threatened, abused, or intimidated through social media or online, through the online channels. So this bit refers to contextual safeguarding. Now, and he is now scared to go out. So here is where the agencies would essentially need to play a major role, because of the fact that he does not feel safe going out on his own. And I think this bit would relate to learning outcome 3 and learning outcome 4. The reason I say this is, in learning outcome 3 and learning outcome 4 I can remember because we discussed it yesterday, it talked about the likelihood of abuse which can happen because of neglect in a healthcare setting. So if the agencies do not respond and take this seriously, that he's receiving threats and messaging on Facebook, this is going to mean that he is going to be facing likelihood of abuse. And this is serious assault, which is physical abuse. And this is definitely related to learning outcome 4. Now, learning outcome 3 talked about identification of legislation, policy, and what is the impact of this legislation and policy on the principles or requirements for safeguarding. So here, this bit here, accident and emergency on a number of occasions and assault, is directly related to learning outcome 3. Why? Because this talks about the impact of key requirements to have safeguarding in place. So he has attended accident and emergencies on a number of occasions. That means there has been, agencies which have been involved in ensuring that he does not get assaulted, or at least the chances of being assaulted get minimized. But they have not been successful in, minimizing it. And this is what they need to look at in terms of the role of practitioners and agencies to minimize the impact in terms of implementing, safeguarding for this individual, which is Andrew. And I think this is related to learning outcome 3. So if you read the case study in a detailed aspect like this, and try and relate to what it is asking you to do so with the learning outcomes and assessment criteria as we have studied. It will make it absolutely clear that what part of the case study is referring or will ask you to invoke and research about the data that you have studied in the sessions, in the unit, in the study of this particular unit. Now, what are the tasks coming out of it? Let's check. So this is what we have essentially, I would say, looked at from our interpretation of the case study, and let's check what task and what way in which it is asking us to do the tasks. So it says, using the case study above, evaluate the extent to which Andrew is at risk, in which way practitioners. So first thing that we've identified is learning outcome 2. So we are, I would say, so far 100% correct. Then it says you should consider the type of abuse which is exposed. And I think we are 100% correct on that aspect as well. We have looked at the types of abuse that he's facing, and obviously we've interpreted that successfully. Then it talks about ensure that you identify and evaluate relevant legislation, policy, and guidelines, in addition to considering the possibility of abuse by which he's going to face. So I think we have been spot on in terms of interpretation of this case study. So this is what you should be able to do when you read the case study, like I've done it for the first time with you today on this session. And we have identified the areas which are reflected and are related to which learning outcomes of the unit. Is that okay? Any questions on this so far? And then towards the end, what I would suggest is focus on some of the command verbs. So if I look at evaluate here, if I look at consider the types, say consider. If I talk about identify and evaluate, right, in terms of wide range of evidence, in terms of research, demonstrate, referencing techniques. These are command verbs which you have to keep in mind, which are going to relate your work and help you score better grades, or increase your chances of scoring a higher grade, because you are providing details related to the evidence, or compiling the evidence using the details related to the case study. But that is where you're also doing justification in terms of what is being asked and is being produced accordingly. So when I look at if I say what does the word evaluate mean? So if I say what does the word evaluate mean, and if you clearly interpret it as that it also means that I need to assess the situation, because we are doing the case study of Andrew, who's diagnosed with autism. So what we are looking at doing is assessing Andrew's situation using this case study or the scenario which has been given. And here what we have to do is we have to assess, judge, and determine what he is going through, what is he facing, and how the agencies and practitioners are essentially looking at ensuring that he is safeguarded and he is not put into the harm's way. So evaluation in this case will involve considering different options, alternatives. You'll be looking at getting into the alternatives. When you consider the options and alternatives, you're looking at which one is the best to be applied in the case of Andrew. So you will look at strengths and weaknesses, or positives and negatives, and depending on whichever alternative is the most positive or the best or the most beneficial is what is going to be considered, and that is what you are going to include in your evidence. So in the academic context, evaluation refers to critical thinking and critical thinking skills. How do you think this situation relates to Andrew's situation? Then you put some arguments to back up that particular situation and the thinking that you are developing. And that situation or the thinking that you are developing is then given evidence in the form of benefits or advantages, pros and cons. You evaluate it, and then towards the end, you stitch what is called, or when I say stitch, I mean you put in theoretical frameworks which are related to helping you analyze Andrew's situation. and that would be evaluation. So if I look at these 1, 2, 3 tasks in general, and if I look at 3,500 words, I can clearly see from how I've interpreted the case study that when I look at this with the introduction, the background, the problems which are being faced and the problem statement, I would write easily 1,000 words here. Then I go into different types of abuses. How do I recognize signs and symptoms of those abuses, relate them to safeguarding principles, and the role of practitioners and agencies in safeguarding? I will write another 1,200 to 1,500 words. And towards the end, we are looking at learning outcome 3, which is talking about legislation policy. So you'll put a couple of them. I don't want to cover 10 policies or, all the policies or legislation or acts which are there. I'll put and cover the CARE Act of 2014, the Mental Health Services Act, because it is related to Andrew's case in terms of autism, because he receives a disability allowance. So if there are acts and legislations which are related to his condition, I'm going to use them in the assignment. And that is what I will use to discuss the acts and legislation and the likelihood of how they will be used by agencies and practitioners to reduce the likelihood of Andrew suffering any harm from possible, the threats that he's receiving online on Facebook. And these would be then minimized using the legislation or, acts, or in this case, orders used by the local authorities to put him out of the harm's way. So to put measures around him so that he cannot, he should not and he cannot be harmed in any way possible. Is that okay? Any questions on today's discussion? So this is where you will look at doing the assignment. And I would say this should be the approach in terms of, looking at completing the assignment for this particular, I would say, case study for this particular unit. Is that okay? Any questions on this? Has any questions at your end? Rosemary?
It's okay, but I'm looking at this case, what is it called? This case study of it, and it's a very big topic, and
so that is where the word limit requirement is. It is not a 750 word assignment. It is not a 1,200, 1,500 word assignment. It is a 3,500 word assignment. And the reason why they've carefully chosen these words in terms of providing situations like autism, disability living allowance, looking at learning difficulties, looking at limited engagement, looking at the types of abuse he's facing, and then the contextual safeguarding abuse that he's going to be having because of threats that he's receiving on Facebook, and the role of agencies that you have to stitch in. That is why these words have been carefully stitched into the case study, which will allow you to expand by doing your research about what you need to write in the assignment.
Yeah, apart from the 3,500 words, there is a lot of details that you need to pick and put there. So that's why I'm saying it's a big topic and it's something.
Yeah, so I think absolutely good. So what we did was, when we looked at, reading the case study, that is why we have looked at, these key words that we have highlighted. And this presentation is going to be up on Moodle. So when you see this particular presentation, you are going to see how I have literally gone across reading the case study with you and picked out these words. We never knew that these are the tasks and this is the order of the tasks, how they are going to come. So I just cut and pasted the case study and the task here. But if you ask me, we have been more or less spot on in terms of, I might go in and again relook at this to say, does it cover some part of learning outcome 1? Does it cover things related to any sort of abuse, bullying, or signs and symptoms? But probably not. And I think we are very clear in terms of how we interpret the case study. That is what will allow us to, get meat on the bones, which is things like if you miss out autism, if you miss out residential care, if you miss out things like learning difficulties, if you miss out things like abuse, in this case, the role of authorities, police, for example, as a word, is clearly showing, the role of authorities, and accident and emergencies, A&E is again an authority, which is the local services provided when you dial 999 and then this is one of the authorities. So these are key words essentially put in by the awarding organization in the construction of the case study, which give you good enough information to be able to then go about analyzing the case and then, answering or looking at, solving the assignment.
Okay.
Okay, good stuff. Any other questions?
How long do we have to submit this one?
Okay, that's a good question again. So if I go to the last slide on the presentation, what we will see is we have 15 days to be able to complete this particular assignment. So timeline for submission is 15th of May 2023. So
Anything more than that?
you can take more than that, not a problem, but I would suggest it should not take more than that, keeping in mind if you write maybe 100, 200 words every day, you should be able to write 3,500 in that. If you take more than that, then you're going to forget what was actually taught in the unit. And this is the first thing that I covered when I started writing the cover sheet. So we started the unit on 15th, and we're looking at completing it on the 15th of May.
All right.
Okay.
So this assignment, are we going to write it in an essay form or what?
It is an essay. It clearly says a report. Your essay should reference, and it's a report of 3,500 words. So you're going to produce a Word document. And how would you do this? By downloading this assignment brief from Moodle, go to the last page. Here, click your mouse, go to insert and insert page break, and then start the assignment from here. And I've given you some indication in terms of how you should structure this report. So first should be looking at introduction. You should write about, a good, I would say 70 to 100 words. Then you are going into the background of the case study, which is where you're explaining some of the key terms and the words that we have discussed and highlighted. Then you're looking at the problem. What is the problem? He feels that he's going to be seriously assaulted, because of the threats that he's receiving on Facebook. And this is where you will cover the role of practitioners in agencies. Then you are going to look at some basic analysis or solution, of the problem that Andrew is facing, solutions to Andrew's, problem. And then what you're going to do is make some recommendation to agencies and practitioners, what they need to be able to do in terms of helping to minimize any incident and safeguard Andrew from any harm. And towards the end, you're looking at making a conclusion of what you presented. So this would, I would say, if I look at background to the case study, about say 400 words. If I look at the problem statement, another 400, I would say between say 600 to 700 words here. And then solution, another 700 to 800 words here. So 700, 800, 1500 plus 4, 1900, 2000, and then recommendation to practitioners and agencies looking at discussing the problem, about 1000 to 1200 words. And that would be looking at, say if I say 1000 words here, and you're looking at conclusion of, 50 to 70 words. So that would basically total to anywhere between 3250 to 3750 words, depending on what essentially you're writing. These are recommendations in terms of topics of how you would structure your report, but you could use different headings, different subheadings, and obviously cover the main bits that we have discussed in the assignment brief, and that would be absolutely fine. Okay, so I will get this presentation uploaded for you up on Moodle, and that would allow you to essentially go about, then also referring to what we've discussed today. And that would, be something that I would suggest that you need to look into as you start writing your assignment. Okay, and next week we are going to be studying, we're going to be starting. Okay, just briefly showing where I'm putting this across now. Okay, here we go. So that's the assignment brief discussion. That's the Word document that you need to download. And that would be, obviously looking at this, taking into account everything for this particular unit. Next unit, for some of you, we'll be looking at starting aspects of human physiology. The ones that haven't studied this unit will obviously be joining the sessions, and some of the others which have completed, you're going to go back and look at some of the units that you haven't submitted assignment or, are looking at obviously submitting assignments for some of the other units. So if there are no more questions, I'm going to end this session here, and we'll hopefully look at arranging for a classroom-based activity, because we've bought some bits and pieces that I would want you to come in and see in the class, and they would be looking at going through some of the key instruments that you should be aware of while studying this course, things like an oximeter, an audioscope, a microscope, a stethoscope, a blood monitor machine, a blood testing, monitor. There are bits and pieces of a thermometer, skeleton system. There are some 120 different slides that we have organized, which allow you to see some bits and pieces of things that we have covered in infectious diseases, some parts of it that we'll cover under human physiology. So there's a microscope that we have bought, and that microscope, with the slides would allow you to examine that in a high resolution in the classroom-based setting. So we'll organize that session, for the coming week. And I'll put some announcements out on the group, and look out for the schedule for the next unit, which is going to be sent by Jill. Now, most of you should be very clearly aware that, when you are looking at discussing about requirements of assignment brief or session schedules, we've got Jill, Miss Jill. She is the one who's the course coordinator. You should be able to reach her and, speak to her on the phone, on the email. And please have the phone numbers. Don't call me on the mobile often, because these are bits and pieces that you should be able to get from her